when it comes to doing this stuff. The times you can't come to class, you will appreciate it, I hope. Although, frankly, I can't think of anything more dull than listening to a tutorial when other people are supposed to be talking to each other. So today I haven't got a slide pack. We're going to use a Menti instead. I think you know the drill as to how to connect to one. And we're going to start, she says not starting, with, okay, maybe let's go bring it up to the forefront. So there's a code for those of you who want to code. Want to do a quick and dirty catch up onto where you're at with your assignments. Have you chosen a company? Have you identified a disruptive technology that that company might use? Have you identified the risks? Have you prioritized the legal risk? Have you started writing? Have you checked your references? For each of those, the scale is from not started, which you can also interpret it like actually have no F's to give, through to it's done, I'm finished, and yay me. And so while people are filling that in, does anybody have any questions about the assignment? I need to offer an apology for those people who read my stuff as soon as I send it out. I stupidly said on Monday that it was due at the end of this week. That is not true. It is due at the end of next week, but I did fix it, but just in case. Feel free to finish it by this week. That is also fine. It was worse for the other class because there's another class I teach that does have an assignment due this week, and I told them that they had an extra week. I got it back to front. It was not pretty. I am not proud. This is capturing information from the slide, the group before as well, just to see where we're at. So I'll wait till I get to about 20 before we all have a look. I have the question that I got in the other class, which I'll lead off with, was around what do I do if I'm seriously over the word count? Don't know how far any of you into, but often that can be one of the difficulties with particularly with a really broad assignment like this. There's a lot of things you can write about. The advice I'm going to give you in relation to this may not apply to other subjects. There are plenty of subjects or courses where the policy is if it's 1,000 words and you're more than 10% over, we get to 1,100 words and then we just stop reading. That is not what I will do, and it is not what the graders who will be grading your assignments will be doing. They'll be looking at the whole thing, and they'll be taking the whole thing into account. What they will be doing is looking where, if you look at the rubric, you will see there's a section of the rubric that deals with it being specifically over or under in wording, and it really goes to communication. In the real world, I have never ever had a client, a boss, anybody who said to me, I really love your work, I just wish the document you sent me was longer, or the email you wrote was longer. People value it being short, concise, and focused. So you will be rewarded for keeping it short, concise, and focused. At the same time, it needs to stand alone. So if you are cutting just for the sake of getting down to the word limit, it might not make sense. So you need to think about that. And ultimately, when we're looking at it, we'll be thinking about, okay, when you're well over the wording, what is likely to happen is you've either tried to address too many issues and you haven't focused in on one or two. And I think of this assignment as like a funnel. I want to see that you've identified a lot of issues. I want to see that you've been able to categorize them into, the important and less important issues. And then I want to see a deep focus on, it can be even as few as one. The deeper you go, the better. You'll be rewarded for going deep. So usually if you're over the word limit, you might be trying to deal with too many issues, or you're repeating yourself, or you're being slavish about the structure. You're thinking, okay, there's a recommended structure, I have to have words in relation to that. Like the guidance that I've given you for this assignment is like roughly 4 times as many words as the assignment you're allowed to write, right? So you've got to make choices. Part of what we're rewarding you for is identifying where do I include something. If you are well under the word limit, which is a more rare consequence for an assignment like this, but it does happen, chances are you haven't gone deep enough. or you've picked your one thing and gone deep on that, but you haven't shown me or demonstrated why that's the one that you need to focus on. So think about that. The other piece of guidance that I gave the group this morning is the guidance I give everybody, from lawyers who've worked for me, teams that I've managed who have to write reports, to students. If you can, treat the due date as at least 48 hours before it's due, probably more than that. I would treat it as Wednesday. This is really annoying. It's going to really bug me if it keeps turning off. Sorry, that could be me not plugging it in. Treat it as due Wednesday next week. When you get to Wednesday next week, draw a line under it. Say, okay, it's done. Put it away. Leave it for at least 24 hours. Longer if you can. So on Friday morning, after finishing it on Wednesday afternoon, open it again. Don't read it. Get Siri on your phone or Alexa on your device or just the AI voice in Word to read the paper out loud to you. Don't look at the screen, just have a notepad and listen for where it doesn't make sense. Listen to the paper with a fresh eye, a fresh ear, and think about the order that things are in there. Are there gaps? Does it stand alone? Does it make sense? Robot voice will read exactly what you have written, not what you think you've written. So you will hear if the sentences are really long or if there's a lot of guff that is in, it's repeating itself, or if you're using weird phrases over and over again. If you'll hear those things, it's actually a different part of your brain that processes oral information than processes visual information, that uses the reading process. So it's actually a really great way to identify, is this making sense? Does it stand together? And allow yourself a couple of hours to just nip and tuck, prune, take out the stuff that's unnecessary and boring, make sure that the flow makes sense. If you were listening to something and thinking, oh, but you talk about that in, we'll fill that out in a bit more detail. You might want to go back and put some sort of signposting in there saying, discussed in more detail in part 3. Whatever it is, to just really refine it, it can really make a difference. So they were the 2 things we spoke about this morning based on questions. Are there other questions, concerns about this assignment? There is an FAQ area, which is a combination of the many, many, many questions that we had last semester. And essentially what I'm trying to do is, rather than just regenerate similar questions and answer them again each semester, is just trying to reuse the questions that were there. So before you send me an email or give me a call, have a look there if you've got a question. If you haven't looked at them, look at them anyway, because some of them are about structure, some of them are about choices that you should be making, some of them are about different issues. The assignment last time was a little bit different. We've narrowed down. Last time they could identify anything they wanted. This time I've suggested. Now, if you find other legal issues that you want to talk about, you're more interested in, you want to do the research, go you. But particularly if you're a business student, I would suggest that you limit the issues to liability, privacy, data protection, or any one of those. When I say limit it, identify more, but drill into the ones that matter. Okay, as we go, if you have more questions, I'll allow some more time at the end in relation to this as well. Let's have a look where people are up to, the big reveal, please. Okay, so this is looking good overall. The colour scheme is not great. So a lot of people haven't really got even close to starting writing by the looks of things, which is fine. That's what this weekend's for, right? Again, I like it that you haven't written. One of the things that can really go wrong with assignments, and actually communications in a workplace too, is people start writing and they write to think. Actually, it is a really good idea to do your research, work out what it is you're going to say, and then write it down. in part, and this is possibly more true of the law students in the room than the business students, law students feel like every word they've written is really precious and they really don't want to kill their darlings, to borrow from, who was it, T.S. Eliot? No, Bernard Shaw. They don't like deleting words, okay? If that is you, don't delete them. Copy and paste them into another document that might be useful for you in assignment 2. If you've come across something and you've decided, oh, actually I've gone too deep on this other issue, maybe it will be useful to you in assignment 2 or assignment 3. So save it. You don't have to kill it. But it's often what happens is if you start writing, also the structure is odd. It happens less and less, but I have seen many assignments that start with, I'm going to prove to you that the biggest issue is white. And then we get through to the conclusion, as you can see, white is not an issue at all, and the biggest issue is black. Like, people have changed their minds as they've done the writing, but they haven't gone back and fixed it. Another reason for looking at that. Okay, I forgot that I do actually have a slide here to ask you to add in questions, concerns about this. Nothing? We'll add them. Sorry. What's going on? Oh, something weird is happening. Okay. This is the scenario. We are going to work with a case study, a hypothetical case study today. So imagine an app. It's called Research Tracker. It's for the most boring and nerdy users of apps of all time, academics and researchers. So it's a mobile app. It's designed to basically track where you go and what kind of research you do. Imagine it as being it's just a really big data nerd app. It recognizes when you're in a library or at a university or at a research institution. It recognizes what you read and whether you talk to or engage with other researchers. It can record your live visits to various locations. It can track the materials that you access, books, journals, other resources. And basically the idea of it is to sort of create this collegiate atmosphere among researchers. You can where other people are doing duckface on Instagram, you can actually show the world how much reading you've been doing, what interests you in your research world. So you're basically providing that. And it aggregates a lot of data. It's our app and it's our imagination, so I've decided it can listen to your conversations and record things so that later on you can go back and check in with it and see what you were thinking about and interrogate your thoughts. It helps you draft your papers, and this is, not just for your normal nerd in the humanities and social sciences like me. This is being used by organisations who are researching new drugs and medical techniques across a range of, if you think of research, it goes really broad. It does, however, aggregate and analyse the data, creating profiles that reveal the kind of research that people are doing. And the information has been accessible, so people can go on this platform and work out what other people are doing. They can access data much in the same way as you can look at what people are doing if you go on Instagram or TikTok, right? But people or corporations have been using what they've found on this app to infer trade secrets, intellectual property interests, or undisclosed research projects. So basically the potential for other people, bad actors, let's call them, to use this for corporate espionage or breaches of confidentiality. Okay, so this is our case study. This is the kind of issue that we're going to look at. Any questions about the scenario? Because this is where I get to do my creative writing. I've made this scenario up, so I hold all the power. Any questions about what this app might do? Any concerns about it? Who's signing up? Nobody. I did try to make it look like something you would not be interested in as much as possible. Okay, my first question for you, I believe you can only drop one pin. So this slide is trying to show you the 13 APPs. What's an APP? Anybody? Just want to make sure that you can respond. Yes, you can. So drop a pin as you go. APP, what does it stand for? An Australian Privacy Principle. So what is an Australian Privacy Principle? Well, what are the Australian Privacy Principles? Please. Yeah, framework's a really good word. So I don't know how loud you are, so I'm going to do that repeating thing. Framework. So essentially, the privacy law is a little bit different from many other regulatory frameworks in that there's legislation, the privacy, and the key, there's lots of different bits of legislation. I talk about some of it in the lecture videos, but the key piece of legislation that we're going to be interested in is the Privacy Act 1988, which is a piece of federal legislation, so it applies across the whole of Australia, basically. And rather than actually specify this is what you have to do in relation to each of these things, it sets these 13 objectives and effectively provides guidelines for how they need to be complied with and consequences if the Act applies to you and you don't actually meet these guidelines in some way. So there are 13 of them, ranging from open and transparent management of personal information through to correcting errors in personal information. I've actually just taken a screenshot from the website of the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. I always get that back to the front of my head, the OAIC website. And here you can see on the web, on the screenshot, it says Chapter 13, APP 13. I thought it was just good to point that out to you, that the APPs are described in some detail on the regulator's website. It can be tempting, well, no, it's not tempting. That's like saying, come in, resist the urge to use calculus. It can be tempting to go and look directly at what the law says and what the APPs say. But in Australia and globally, many regulators provide guidance as to how they read and understand the law that they're responsible for regulating. So OAIC is no different here. And so I actually find this much more accessible. If you're trying to get your head around, is one of the APPs relevant in my assignment? Actually going and having a look at the guidance, it tells you what the law is, but it also explains when and why the regulator might get involved. So I wanted to remind you there. So let's, only 12, I want to see a few more there. You're only allowed to pick one. So I want you to pick the most important one. So think about which of these APPs might be relevant to the scenario that I just described. Research Tracker, the Mega app. And in the meantime, I'll put the lolly wrappers in the bin. A few more. Nobody knows whether you got it right or you got it wrong. I just want to see if we're sort of on the same page. And if you haven't got to the point of learning about the APPs or thinking about them or getting through that material yet, just look at the headings. What makes sense to you? Okay, we've got 20 of them in now. Let's have a look. Here we go. So we've got quite a few people here around. Oh, look, and by the way, I've put a link in there if you just want to save that link to where these came from. We've got quite a few people, particularly around APP3. We've got 5, probably 6 people in that space. We've got 5 who think number 6 is relevant, particularly relevant. Notification 4 is all 4 of you in exactly the same spot. I feel like that's very coordinated. and special. Well done. Excellent. So they're kind of the most important ones. My thinking was that let's focus in on 6 to start with. And the reason, now it's not necessarily correct or incorrect answer, by the way. It says Menti is a bit of a blunt tool. The ones I'm most interested in, I think, would be 3, 6, and 11. But the reason that I'd start with 6 is it's pretty broad, and that scenario didn't give you a lot of information. So often, particularly in these days of generative AI, the answers aren't as interesting as the questions. And so another way I could have asked you that, which I think would have been more meaningful, is what questions would you ask in order to work out which of the APPs apply? So why don't we have a go at that? What questions, so I've given you the information about Research Tracker. I'll just go back and we'll have a look at it again. She says, boom, boom, boom. Oh, got overly excited. What don't you know that might be relevant to your decision about looking into the APPs? Anyone? So one of the things that we were talking about when we were discussing what an APP is was that the APPs sit under the Privacy Act 1988. That's a long time ago, number one. And the APPs are relevant to entities that are required to comply with the Privacy Act. Is that everyone? No. You're going to regret any body language coming my way because I don't want to do all the talking. It just looks that way. So, do we think that Research Tracker is likely to have to comply with the Privacy Act, or is there a question we would need to ask in order to work that out? So, there is no right to privacy in Australia. There is no embedded in the Australian Constitution right to privacy. Australia is a signatory to a number of international treaties, and in particular, there is an international treaty relating to human rights, which includes in it that privacy is a human right. There is a human right to privacy. But the way you may remember from week 1 that these kind of things work is that if Australia signs a treaty, then the next question is actually has to back that up with a piece of legislation. And at the federal level, there is no equivalent of a Bill of Rights in Australia. There is some human rights legislation in Victoria, but there's no necessary equivalent. So the Privacy Act basically applies to personal information that's collected or held or used, processed by organisations that have a turnover of $3 million or more. That number hasn't changed for a very long time. $3 million. It also applies to organisations that process, collect, deal with, I'm using the wrong verbs here, I suspect, sensitive information. So all sensitive information is personal information, but not all personal information is sensitive information. So if the business has a turnover of less than $3 million but deals with health information or information relating to children, for example, there's a range of different options there, then it will most likely be covered by legislation that's akin to, but not exactly the same as the Privacy Act, so Data Records Act or Health Records Act legislation, etc. So think about the industry that the company you're operating in. If you are providing some kind of service or product that relates to health, the privacy obligations that the organisation will have will be different from an organisation that sells shoes. So one of the questions, going back to this, in order to work out whether the Privacy Act applies to Research Tracker, what's one of the questions we would be asking? Should be pretty straightforward here. You business people who don't want to spend money on lawyers, you might be thinking you're working for Research Tracker. Is our turnover $3 million or more? Because maybe we don't have to comply, right? We also, though, some companies will have opted in to comply anyway. So let's say Research Tracker, let's say it's a relatively new startup. Like many social media platforms, it's got a huge valuation because it's got lots of users. It's finally a place where your weirdo academic can feel safe. Lots and lots of users internationally, but actually not a lot of revenues at this stage. So it's actually, maybe it doesn't comply. But like many organisations, imagine you're signing up to Research Tracker for the first time. What would you expect to have to do when you signed up? Sorry about that. I do not know why it's doing that. It's very annoying. What would you expect to do when you're signing up to use this app, which is going to follow you around and automatically record your conversations with other academics and stuff like that? What would you imagine will happen? You're going to agree to some terms and conditions. I read there, so if you said something different, please give me an indication. You will probably tick a box. How many of you read every set of terms and conditions that comes your way? Good, I'm glad you don't lie to me. I've been in classes where students have lied to me and say they never do anything without reading the terms and conditions, and I do not believe them, and I don't do it either, right? It's like, it's one of those situations where you want something, it's just a hurdle that's in the way, and you actually feel like you have no power over it anyway. And if this startup is like many other startups I've come across, it's saving money on lawyers, so what does it do? It goes and finds another privacy policy from somewhere. It might actually have put a privacy policy on its website. And its terms and conditions probably say that we'll deal with your data in the way that our privacy policy says. And its privacy policy, if they've stolen it from an Australian company, is likely to say that they'll comply with the Australian privacy law. And even if they've put their mind to it, they're likely to say that as well, because they want their customers to trust them with their data. So one of the first questions you need to be asking, particularly if you're thinking about whether the privacy law applies or whether you've got a privacy legal consideration for your technology, is actually, would the Australian privacy law apply? You've got to think about things like the size of the company and what it does. You've got to think about the type of data that it's actually collecting, whether or not it's personal information or sensitive information, so because the outcome might be different. You're also needing to think about where does it collect it. So another question I would be asking really early on is like, who uses this app and where are they located? So if we've got European academics who are using it, we're collecting data from people who are residing in Europe or European citizens who are here, we might, as far as the EU is concerned, need to comply with European legislation. So the GDPR, the General Directive Privacy Regulations, but I should say that with a French accent because that's kind of what it is. So on Canvas, you'll see there's a little bit about the GDPR, and the purpose of having that there is currently the GDPR standards are the highest standards globally. There are arguments give and take in different places and different US states, for example, but it's a good benchmark. Australia was one of the first countries to have a Privacy Act, partly because we don't have an embedded right to privacy. 1988. The kind of issues that we were thinking about when it came to protecting personal information in 1988 were quite different from the kind of issues that we have to deal with now. And so there are reviews of the Privacy Act that are happening all the time. The APPs, in fact, were part of a major review. Oh, I can't remember how long ago now, but they've been around for a while. I want to say 10 years, but it might be as many as 15. There is a significant review of the Privacy Act that is going on now, and there is some material in Canvas about that review. Just yesterday, Bill Shorten announced the introduction of, or the proposed introduction of an Australian digital ID. Does anybody see that? The main use case seems to be that you'll be able to show a QR code, like a generated in the moment QR code from your phone when you go into a bar, and they will be able to age verify you without taking any of your personal information. It'll be, if any of you have ever used the MyGov verification process, you possibly have very low expectations of how well that's going to work. I also thought it was pretty interesting that they're investing $11.4 million in this tech. I reckon they've spent more than that in the publicity on it. And yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that is going on in that space. So yeah, anyway, digital ID is slightly different from privacy, but in order to verify who you are, you have to hand over a whole heap of personal information, right? And so for my money, in 1988, the big issue with privacy was actually we're getting more and more automated, and there's more opportunities for people to steal people's data and basically pretend to be them, spend their money on their credit cards and do identity theft. These days, the issues that you're going to have to grapple with are significantly different. So there is clearly identity theft and hacking is a significant issue, right? And it's deeply linked to the question of personal information. But what I think is more interesting, I mean, that's interesting. I don't want to say it's not interesting, and it's definitely a critical issue. But in order to sell things to you or to put ideas into your head or expose you to ideas, these days the actor doesn't actually need to know who you are. They don't need any of your personal information anymore. Any of you who's done online shopping will be aware of this, that my online shopping will show me shoes and never shows me handbags. As simple as that. A huge amount of investment has gone into that prediction. So when somebody with this particular device ID does this particular thing, I don't know what's going on here. I really hope that's recording. When somebody does, then this particular advertising is going to be of more interest to you. Netflix is one of the biggest users of this kind of A/B technology. Those of you in business who've done any marketing courses, you'll be looking at these ways in which we test A/B or more different versions to work out who's going to do what. But with these huge data sets behind them, organizations are able to say, okay, once we've identified users in this particular demographic, from this particular ID, they're interested in true crime. And they're more likely to be interested in this kind of true crime documentary than that kind of true crime documentary. Interesting, a lot of this technology and development has basically come out of pornography and gambling. You know, the internet is for porn, and effectively these industries that it was difficult for them to actually make money in the mainstream, but there is a huge market for these services. They are able to, they've used their time on the internet and the massive amounts of data that they collect in order to predict what's going to work, where they're going to be able to sell money. So, well, where they're going to be able to sell product and make money, I should say. Sorry, I went off on a bit of tangent there. Chances are we'll come back on track at some point. So, asking the right questions to start off with. I think one of the key things that we need to think about here is use or disclosure, and that goes down to this question of informed consent. So academics using this, another thing we need to be asking is, are they expecting that the information that's collected about them and how they do their research could be used by competitor organisations for industrial espionage purposes? Is that something that the APPs would need to disclose, or under APP 6 you need to disclose to get informed consent? What do you think? Let me have a look. Oh, sorry, I've just highlighted here the ones that I want. Let's go, or that I was interested in. Actually, I've skipped the wrong question. Let's actually go to this question first. Do they have an obligation to obtain consent? Let's assume that that they've got a turnover of more than $3 million. So let's assume it's an Australian company. It's got a turnover of more than $1 million. It has users all over the world. Does it have to obtain consent from its users? Before I show the information, does anybody have any questions or criticisms of this question? I think it's a terrible question. You know how people say there's no such thing as a stupid question? I think this is a stupid question, frankly. Obtain consent for what? So we could say, are we asking for consent for the data to be made public, tracking data? Are we asking for consent to just collect personal information and use it for the stated purpose of Research Tracker, which is to create a research community and help people track the research that they've done? The short answer is that if they're a compliant organisation, sorry, let me find where this is. They're a compliant organisation, yeah, they do need to get consent. Okay, they do need to get that consent. They will be in breach of the Privacy Act if they don't. And if they're collecting from all over the world, the European Union may say that they are also breaching European laws. And different states in the US may also say that they're breaching US laws if they don't get that consent. But the consent requirement is to informed consent. So what does informed consent look like? And for the most part, it looks like I'm going to collect your data and use it in the ways that I think I'm going to use it. Here, the issue that's likely to come up is other people are going to get that data and use it in ways that we didn't contemplate to start off with. They might be able to put their own AI over information that they get and make sense of it in some different way. So think about, has anybody ever used Instagram? Is there anybody who's never used Instagram? No, I won't out you in this circumstance. When you think about it, I'm kind of describing something that's a bit like Instagram. Like, if I really wanted to, I could go onto Instagram, find you, and learn stuff about you. And if I was really clever, I could train a bot to do that instead. And I could have a look across, I could identify people, I could use the metadata in the photos they upload to work out where they go, where they travel. I could look at the venues that they go to and make calls about whether they like drinking and dancing or athletics or football or whatever. I could probably pass out on a timeline how much time you spend at university and how little time you spend at university. Snapchat at one point, I think they turned it off, but really early on they had, heat map information so you could see where people were in different places. There's all sorts of things. So if I'm clever enough and frankly interested enough, I could aggregate, I could get a whole lot of different social media aggregation, I could get some tracking information. If I'm able to, if you've consented to me recognising your phone, so in some way I can recognise your device, I can probably work out where you are, and then I can predict stuff about you. Because that's what big data lets us do, right? Automate that decision making and prediction. Um, but actually, other than the device bit, because I got a bit carried away with my scenario, actually, if I'm doing something going through and looking at various social media accounts to aggregate and collate information about you, you haven't given me permission to do that. That's just all public facing information. You've given Meta authority to take your images and share them, either on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, whichever of the Meta suite that you're using, or you've given Snapchat or TikTok or whatever. Your privacy relationship and contractual relationship is with them. I'm just mining over the top. So do you have to give consent to that? Technically, no, but we have some obligations in relation to what we hold on to. So what recommendations would you make for capturing the consent that Research Tracker has to capture? So we've agreed it has to capture something, informed consent. How and where would you do that? Just a couple of words, let's see what we can get. There are a few people from the first tutorial who've already done this, so I'll get a few more in here. Bonus points for anybody mentioning an APP that might actually drive your decision making here. And when I say bonus points, there's like it's anonymous and I can't know. Can't find you. Terms and conditions. So what are terms and conditions? They're the things that stand out here. Terms and conditions, T's and C's, terms. What are they? From a legal perspective, what are we talking about when we say terms and conditions? It's what you sign up to. It's the contract. It's the agreement, right? So again, when we talked about the different ways that Research Tracker, can't remember what I call this company, Research Tracker might be obliged to comply with the APPs is if as part of its terms and conditions, it's made that promise. So we'll talk a lot more about what a contract is and when a contract is enforceable as we move forward, but particularly as most of you are business people, contract is the main thing that you're going to be thinking about because contracts are the basis on which you can make your customer pay for the thing that you are selling or ensure that your supplier delivers the thing that you need in order to move forward with the business that you're doing. So there's different things. So we've got this, and there are different versions of that in here. I think there is a mention here of APP3, which I think is really important. So what it needs to do is APP3 basically says that it needs to ensure that it collects only the personal information necessary for its operations. Okay, so part of the problem we've got here is that somebody else is able to use this information more broadly, but it should only be collecting the personal information that is necessary for its operations. And it needs to do it in a lawful and transparent manner. To comply with the principle, it should make clear to its users what data is being collected, why it's necessary, and how it will be used. But I'm not sure that that helps us when somebody else is coming over and aggregating and taking that data and using it in a different way. Another one here that might be relevant is APP5. That's the one that requires that users be notified at the time of collection or as soon as practicable afterwards about a range of different things. The purpose for the collection, the entities to whom it might be disclosed, and the rights that the users have to access the information, for example. And so we've got this overlay, and this is a legal considerations course, right? So we're thinking, okay, we've got this overview, this overriding set of laws. and APP principles for how it works. But we actually might end up with liability or obligations through other legal considerations as well, like contract. And I know, look, I'll have law students rolling their eyes at me, but you guys kind of have to remember that in the real world, the world doesn't break up the laws into, okay, it's semester 2, we're doing contract, and it's week 4, so this must be about consideration. Actually, in the real world, we might have contract, we might have a statutory obligation, we might have a policy reason, we might have an employment law reason, all of which are stacked up, and we've got to prioritise and work out which ones they are. Questions, concerns, comments? So now, sitting at your tables, actually, I'm going to open up the questions, the anonymous questions, actually, which I'm usually a bit scared to do because I miss them, but I sort of feel like I'm talking over you. I'm talking over the void. In your groups, I'd like you to just have a chat about this. What limitations do APP6 apply on data sharing with third parties? And just have a look. Go and have a look at the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner website if it's not just snapping straight to. And just each group, just nominate one person to put something up. We'll have a look at it that way. And then I will also open the just general questions if I can work out how to do it. Oh yeah, it's actually enabled Q&A on all slides. Ah, that's interesting. And if you don't know each other's names, share that information with each other when you're having a chat. Fancy pair of sunglasses here on the desk. Okay, let's see what we can see. Okay, so we've got some coming through. I like this one. APP limits data sharing with third parties to the primary purpose of collection. Is there anyone who disagrees with that? If you do, go and have a look at the APP. I think that is a good statement. Consent is required for other uses unless the exceptions apply and ensuring compliance with the privacy laws. So let's think about this primary purpose of collection. What does that mean? What is the primary purpose of collection with our app? Could I, as the CEO of Research Tracker, could I argue that the primary purpose of collection is to help researchers do research, so making the data available to other researchers is a good thing, because the primary purpose is to make research good. What do we think of this? Well, this is like the social media, this is research media, right? It's basically, imagine it a bit like Instagram for researchers, but on speed. A bit more like one of the Chinese companies perhaps than like the Social Credit, where like it's recording anything that might be relevant to your research as an academic or as a student. It's recording where you go, what you're doing, who you're talking to. So, you and I have a bit of a conversation and it'll work out, okay, they're probably interested in APP6 and this, it'll kind of pull that information together and impact both of our profiles, kind of creating the equivalent, I guess, of a heat map of what we're interested in. And then that having that data available means, think about it, who's ever done a Google search and put in the first few words as if they're asking a question and then it fills in the rest for you? Okay, that's an artificial intelligence doing that, right? And where does it come from? Like is Donald Trump a, and it'll fill that sentence in for me. Now, if it's recognised from my previous search history that I'm a good old boy and that I like the Confederate flag and that I was, in Washington on the 6th of January, that fateful year, 2021, was it? Can't remember now, 2021, that's right. Then chances are it might complete that with, is Donald Trump an American hero? Right, that might be its top thing. Where's it getting that from? It's getting that from a combination of the data, searches that have been made, and it's predicting based on my search history what I might be interested in. Because what does Google want? Google wants me to click on the links that are going to take it to ads that are going to work for me and sell me stuff so it makes revenue, right? Fair enough. But if I should do this. I just picked this search term this morning and it seems to resonate for me. If I were to put in, is Donald Trump, I suspect it would come up with something like certifiably insane or really weird or something that reflects the searches and the news that I'm more interested in that I've been getting, right? So here, actually we could use this data, all of the researchers, to identify research trends, right? And so the university does that already. I am quite aware, I'll come to you in just a second, I'm quite aware that the university will do searches over LinkedIn, Glasshouse or Glass Ceiling, whatever it's called, Seek and a range of other organisations to look at job descriptions and identify using big data analytics effectively what kind of skills and knowledge are people who are employing graduates looking for. So they can feed that back into decisions of, and this is why we have a course with the most ridiculous name. Like, I can't even see it on Canvas when I open it up. Legal considerations of AI, big data, and blockchain. Somebody clearly has that, because I've also got legal issues in acquisitions, takeovers, and mergers. Like, why can't it just be like something a bit more manageable? But anyway, but it's using that data for that reason. What were you going to say? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and there's plenty of research that will show that one of the ways that law enforcement identifies people who are potentially radicalised is through the search queries that they make and essentially the algorithms that point in that direction. There's no doubt that certain radical groups from the Middle East to the USA and Russia, Ukraine as well, the radicalised groups are often using this kind of big data technology and we all know we get the news we want, right? Because we find, and it's, I want to actually do another exercise with you shortly where I'll look at, well, what's the effort and the impact? And like, I know, I am clearly, a person of my time. I am a stereotypical ABC viewer, but during the Olympics, at one time in every 4, or it might have been 3 years, I had to move to Channel 9 for the brief amount of time I was there, and we'd get into the news. I'm like, really? This is not news. This is not news. It was just, it felt completely different. So I'm thinking, I don't want to watch this other news. But actually, my brain would benefit from watching a range of different points of view, right? because even the decision about what is news is part of what shapes our understanding of how the world works. And one of the issues that we see with social media is that we end up with these limited understandings of how the world works because we get the news that verifies what we see. So during the COVID lockdowns, for example, conspiracy theorists and vaccine theorists were getting news that confirmed their points of view because that's what the algorithm was sending there. And there's not necessarily any particular malice in the algorithms doing that, but what the algorithms are trying to do, or the people who write them are trying to do, is to keep people on the platform for as long as possible. And there is no doubt that the way our brains work, the more shocking and disturbing news is, the more likely we are to read it. And so it's playing with our psychology in ways that, well, particularly next week, we'll focus on a little bit more. With this particular issue, with APP6, there are a couple of things that I really wanted to point out here. Let me just go back to, because we've got a few answers in here. Let's see. One of the things that is interesting here, I think, with this case study is, at the moment at least, Research Tracker hasn't said I'm going to give this data to somebody else or I'm going to sell it to somebody else. But other entities are finding ways to scrape and use that data. And that in and of itself, if it's public-facing data, probably doesn't require any particular privacy consideration. Now, another question could be whether or not Research Tracker says, no, excuse me, that's our intellectual property. The compilation, the way we've compiled that data belongs to us. So if you're taking that away and using it, then you're breaching our intellectual property. Something we'll get to in a couple of weeks. But that's actually quite a hard argument to run. Let's see if there's anything in there. Good stuff. I think it's probably a good idea if we took a 5-minute break. Please don't let me start again without switching on the recording. Stretch your legs, move around, have a drink of water, make a queue in the bathroom, do what it is that you need to do. We'll come back in 5 minutes at 25 to. So let's continue. So a couple of things that I just wanted to make sure that you thought about when it comes to APP6. So APP6 is all about sharing data with other entities. And there's a difference between actively sharing and other entities just taking that data and using it in different ways. And I don't think that the Australian law deals with the second of those particularly well if it doesn't fit into a kind of neat process. But when we're talking about sharing data with other entities, the onus is on the entity that's collected the data. So in this case, we're talking about Research Tracker, to determine whether the sharing aligns with the primary purpose of the data collection. So then the question becomes, what's that primary purpose? And with our kind of idea here, it's like we're collecting the data for the purpose of research. I think there's a reasonable argument there, but again, we need a lot more information. The other thing is that they need to make sure that third parties who receive the data are bound by similar privacy obligations, particularly for the sensitive data. Now, this is research data, so we don't actually know whether it's going to incorporate sensitive data or not, right? If it collects data sets, for example, so I'm imagining WEHI down the road, so the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute does a whole heap of research in relation to cancer. And, you know, it's part of Melbourne University. There are med tech things that it does with RMIT as well. But it's a massive research institute and it's constantly researching new drugs, new vaccinations, new approaches to doing lots of different things. So imagine that these guys are doing research with a view to creating, okay, the thing I want, a vaccine against cancer, any type. Something that you can, I don't know, I don't like needles, a pill that you can take when you're 2 years old and you'll never get cancer for the rest of your life. They're this close. Imagine they're this close to doing that. But then we've got drug companies all around the world who are really, they're all keen to create a blockbuster drug like that. And so if they're able to see from the work that WeHi is doing and be able to use predictive analytics over this massive data set that they're able to collect because of the social nature of this research sharing, and get in first, would that be a big issue? And would it fit under the APPs? I think it's a different set of rules. It's not a privacy issue here. It's actually an intellectual property issue. Let me find what I'm doing. Let's have a look. Actually, I'm going to skip that one we skipped in the last time. Do we see any ethical issues here? So legal issues and ethical issues, I think we've agreed separately that they're different things. Well, those of you who attended the first tutorial did, that legal and ethical issues can be different from each other. Are there any particular ethical issues that we see in relation to this kind of app that we might need to deal with? I can see that there's a little trigger here. I'll come back to that at the end. Okay, think about that. The criteria for your assignments are always looking for legal and ethical, right? So one of the criteria here might be, like an ethical question might be around unexpected uses of that data. And when we recognise them, what we do about them. There might be none. But thinking about being able to work out, is there some sort of issue here, could be quite different. Okay, let's think like business people for a change. This is the exercise I was mentioning a little bit earlier on. I've identified 4 different legal levers, so legal considerations that Research Tracker could use to address the potential risks. I want you to think about them as like from the point of view of how much impact doing that thing will have on the problem and how much effort you think it would take to put that thing in place. So we've got terms and conditions, privacy policies and the procedures that go with them, just removing the features in the app that have the potential to reveal this sensitive information, or requiring users to confirm each time they use the app that their information might be public or might be available publicly. So you understand, I'm assuming you can see the question, you get to kind of balance the levers. I really like this tool particularly when you're doing problem solving exercises in business or in study. Often what you're being asked to do is prioritize things, right? What are the things that you need to do? What should you do first? And by thinking, if doing this thing is easy to do, so minimum effort, but it's going to have a big impact, then definitely we should do it, right? If the thing is going to have a big impact, but it's really hard to do, then we probably want to do the things that are easier to do before the things that are hard to do, right? If something's really hard to do and it's barely going to have any impact at all, draw a line under it and move on, right? That's a luxury. Particularly writing an assignment. The thing that, is like around, I don't know, hand drawing and colouring in pictures that are going to have like this much impact, they're going to take you ages to do, probably don't need to do them, right? Like you intuitively know this. So think about it from the point of view of business. This is a way that business prioritise activities all the time, particularly if we don't know what the outcome is going to be. We think it might have a big impact, but we're not sure. So let's actually, another way I could have done this grid was like, how uncertain are we? But for this thing, I think we know. So just hoping we've got more than 20 in there now. So let's have a look and see what you're thinking. This happened last time too. Everybody's bunching in the middle, which I find some of these things, I think, actually putting up a set of terms and conditions, particularly when you think about it from the point of view of Research Tracker, If we basically want to minimize our liability in contract by having terms and conditions that say if other people see your social media profile and do things that you're not happy with, that's not our fault. It's you've got the right to remove information or remove followers at any time. That's pretty easy to put the words in, right? Doesn't require any technological change. It's really easy to do. Would it have a big impact? I'm probably with the person who's right down here, thinking, nah, it's probably not going to have a huge impact, but it is pretty easy to do. Uh, and again, if I genuinely believed it was up here, I need to get my thing to, oops, clumsy lady. So if I genuinely believed it was up here oh God, that's got on the wrong setting. I'm trying to say that it's up in this corner here, then that's the thing that we would do. The negative consequences are a way of thinking about it. If this entity actually does have to comply with the privacy law, then it's going to be in breach if it doesn't do it. It's an easy thing to do. So again, the negative consequences, including to its reputation, if it's breached the law, could be significant. So that's another reason why, if you're thinking in the negative, you might put it sort of higher up on that scale. But I'd have it way over there because it's not hard to do. Risks, privacy policies and procedures sitting in the middle. We've got a real spread, which is why they're in the middle here. The privacy policies are relatively easy, but the procedures or the work that goes around maintaining them can be really difficult, particularly if we're thinking about cybersecurity. Like writing a contract, that's a once a year thing. The law changes, you'll review it. You know, you've kind of got a one-off sunk cost, and then you just basically only let users come on if they tick the box, right? But actually making sure you do the things that your privacy policy says you're going to do, particularly if that includes maintaining best practices in relation to security, that's an employee. You're paying somebody $200,000 a year, you know, at least, when you think about, you know, salary and the cost of giving them an office and the computer and the software and all of the rest of it to actually maintain that. So the effort or the cost is actually quite significant. What's the impact? I don't think it's enormous, but it's significant you don't do it. And again, we think about things like the Optus hack. We think about CrowdStrike a couple of weeks ago. We think about how people think about and trust organizations. There could be really good reasons for doing that. Removing the features, this is an interesting one. I think, because this could go either way, right? Impact, the actual effort could be quite small. So locking down features, most of you would have bought something at some point under a freemium model. You get something for free, and if you want a, you know, a game or something, and if you want to unlock all of the extra features, you have to pay some money. And so that kind of model could mean if you want higher security protection or if you want to limit information about what you're doing just to your organization or the people that you do, then you pay some money for it. It's like could be a good economic model for it. Technically, the way most companies do that is everybody gets the whole thing. They just literally have some of the features locked and you can unlock them. It's not a terribly technically difficult thing to do. But then understanding actually what's a feature and what's a bug can be really interesting in these kind of developing technologies as well. It may well be that the reason people want this technology is so that they can work out how what they're doing fits with other people. Or they want to show the world what they're doing. So again, we don't necessarily know what that means. I hate it with the white ones. Oh, I've done it again. That's why they should never let middle-aged women deal with technology. Number 4 sits in the end. I reckon you would lose customers doing this really, really easily. If every time you went into Instagram, you had to manually tick a whole lot of boxes that reminded you that actually, you know, you might feel uncomfortable with your body image. You might feel, other people might see where you've been and what you're doing. Studies have shown that Instagram can negatively impact your mental health, but I'm okay with all of that. If you had to do that every time, how long do you think you would do it for? So yes, it's technically possible. It's easy to do. I think it would have an impact on your business, but whether it's the impact that you want it to have, I'm not so sure. Sorry, my watch is trying to Bluetooth. I'm going to I've skipped one just because I skipped in the last one and I don't think it really adds anything. Okay, thinking about our scenario, thinking about this use of this data scraping for industrial espionage, which of the following actions could the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner take against Research Tracker if it was proven in some way that Research Tracker essentially let this information out into the world? More than one of these might be correct, and so talk amongst your peers. If you think that more than one of them is correct and you all agree, just take it in turns for which ones you're going to add in, and we'll have a look. Enforceable undertakings, determination orders, penalties, fines, criminal sanctions, or an apology. Or an apology. Get a few in. Okay, we've got a bit of a range, a few more coming in here. It's actually showing the correct answers. I've hit the button so that it should. There we go. So, Office of Information, it's got quite extensive powers, but it's not a criminal prosecutor. So you can't actually there are no criminal consequences for failure to comply with the privacy law. There are penalties, civil penalties and fines. Nobody's going to jail, right? So that's kind of important. Nobody ever picks require a public apology, but this is probably the most used sanction. As part of it's like wrapping everybody over the knuckles. Part of the power in the legislation and behind this regulator is the regulator basically can require you to go public when you're stuffed up. And the regulatory reasoning there is that companies don't want their reputation damaged. Companies don't want people to know that their data was insecure or financial information was insecure in some way. So by actually putting that requiring a public apology, mandatory data breach reporting, those kind of things into the legislation, it's essentially nudging companies to, okay, even if it's not bad, even if nobody's going to get hurt here, it could be super embarrassing for us and it could impact our relationship with our customers, with our suppliers, so we need to comply. That's kind of the thinking behind it. So just be aware of that. The next thing I just really want to remind you of, I think it's already come up in our conversation, is that if Research Tracker, I've forgotten the name of my company already. If Research Tracker also operates in the EU, then the GDPR could apply. Now, again, it's a little bit harder for an EU regulator to come and smash an Australian company over the head, but it can actually prevent its citizens from dealing with the app. I was telling the other group, I had a really interesting conversation with a client of mine earlier this week. So the client runs a fairly large engineering consulting firm that's based in Singapore, and they do a lot of work in defence and cybersecurity. And they've now started, because of the GDPR, because of the strict levels of compliance, coupled with they have very secure premises. So because of the nature of the work they do, particularly working for defence across a range of different countries, they don't want bad actors to come in, and industrial espionage is an issue. So like many organisations, there's swipe cards and control processes to get in and out of the building. And so if you're in the building, it's tracking who you are and where you are and who you talk to and what you do as part of its compliance with contracts that it has with the defence organisations that it does. But now, whenever it's dealing with anybody new, anybody who hasn't gone through a whole consent process to be in their building, they just have all of their first meetings in hotels and bars and public spaces because the compliance overload from the UK, or from both the UK and the EU, basically if I'm seeing you and I'm collecting this information about you, because they do collect like passport numbers and quite sensitive information before they let them in the building. So I just think it's really funny that this thing that's supposed to protect everybody, in the end, they just move it offshore. Again, it's that effort to reward. If it's a new customer, really putting them through all of these hoops before they come into the building, is it worth it? The deal might not go anywhere. It's just time and money spent. So let's think about our scenario a little bit more. I want to kind of, basically push it out a little bit further. So we're going to think about a situation where a third party used data that it's scraped from Research Tracker to uncover trade secrets related to a high-profile drug discovery. So I use the add-on that we were talking about before. WeHi, it's come up with a discovery for a cancer vaccine, and I'm just picking Pfizer because it's the name of a drug company I know. I know these recordings go public, so if you're from Pfizer and you're listening to this, I'm sorry I made it up. Pfizer, some researchers there are on this app. They basically take the data that's available and they have a look at it. They might use some other AI or some other technology. They recognize, isn't it interesting, these WeHi guys, we know they're working on this kind of area. We see they're looking at that. That's really interesting. They go, they make this discovery pretty much at the same time, or maybe they get to the patents office sooner. So we've suddenly, these people who've done the hard yards, somebody else has got a shortcut. Now, we'll talk a lot more about intellectual property in a coming week, but basically how drug companies make their money is they make lots of small bets in the hope that they have one big win. And the big win takes the form of a patent over a blockbuster drug, which gives them 20 years globally to exploit that medicine before others can come in and make it under generic. So essentially the bargain that we do globally is, in exchange for you telling us how you do something, is we will give you an exclusive right to do it. So it needs to be novel. It needs to meet a whole heap of standards. But so in this imaginary scenario, Pfizer's got to the patent office first, claimed this novel invention. It's going to have the blockbuster drug. The poor guys down there in the road in Carlton, they're like, what happened? This is our work. Why has this happened? And Research Tracker, they realise, is to blame. Their people, by sharing their exciting discoveries and what they're doing, has given the other guys the clue. Okay, if you were the CEO of WeHi, on a scale of 0 to everybody's getting the sack and I'm scorching the earth, how are you responding to this? Learning that all those people you're paying the big bucks to, all of that research that's been done, you can't actually protect it now. Are you happy about this? So this is a circumstance where actually I think it's quite reasonable to say, even though I'm really glad nobody's ever going to have cancer again, I'm really mad. So what do you want to do? You want to sue somebody, right? Who do you want to sue? The company. Which company? There's a few companies involved. You want to sue me? Do you want to sue Pfizer? Yeah, I think you probably want to sue Pfizer, right? You want to sue Pfizer. So what's Pfizer saying? Has Pfizer stolen, from their point of view, have they stolen information from WeHi? Might be unethical maybe, but they probably haven't actually stolen the information, right? It's out there in the public domain. In fact, there's an argument maybe that maybe it's not novel even, this thing, because all this research is out there, right? What about Research Tracker? Does anybody want to sue Research Tracker? I'm thinking WeHi probably does as well. I think it's quite likely that Pfizer has deeper pockets. But again, when we're thinking of who's responsible here, actually, has Research Tracker put this data out into the world? Now, here we're talking about data protection rather than privacy, but I think it's an interesting question. So, what kind of steps do you think that Research Tracker could take to manage this kind of crisis? I would call this a crisis, right? It's out in the world. Pfizer's going to get a patent over this drug that will literally eliminate cancer. And it has developed this drug based on insights, trends that it got from effectively putting an AI and passing a whole heap of data on the world's nerdiest social media platform that doesn't exist. Immediate steps. Talk amongst yourselves, talk in your group, and just put something up for your group of what you think they should do. We only have half an hour, so we're going to be moving fast, fast, fast. Let's have a look. I'm loving, this is my favorite. Analysis paralysis, though, can be problematic. Gather the facts, work out what's going on. Best answer last time around was get a lawyer, which is usually my favourite answer. But you've got to know what it is that you're asking the lawyers to look at. So assessing the situation, a little bit of calm makes a lot of sense. Okay, this is a good one. Put the data breach under the Privacy Act. Is there a data breach? I suspect the step before this is to assess whether there's a data breach. The way I've tried to describe it, I don't think there is. We're talking about a data protection issue. Question whether from WeHi's point of view, there might be, is there the release of data into this platform that shouldn't have been released? It could be a data breach because particularly if we've got, depending on how sexy this particular social media platform that's imaginary is, it might be soaking up data sets that contain sensitive information from people on whom tests have been done. But if it doesn't, then the other thing is it could also contain confidential information. So again, one of the things that academics are having to grapple with at the moment is using generative AI, the extent to which by putting information in a question into a generative AI, are you actually breaching confidentiality obligations? Law firms in particular are kind of, it's really interesting to law firms, how can we train AI over all of the data that we have in order to get better legal outcome without actually breaching the confidentiality obligations and the other ethical obligations we have to our clients. So if there is a data breach, I suspect that there isn't, then clearly notifying the parties going through the process is going to be really important. This ultimately comes down to where Research Tracker is going to need to be thinking about. It's like actually what it's going to be trying to do is push off liability. So actually how you use this data is up to you. It's up to you as companies to not release things that you don't want to get out there. All we're doing is making it easy for information that should be out in the universe to be shared. And that's all that we're doing. We don't look at the data, we just make it easy to do that. Who does that sound like? Sounds like Elon Musk to me. It's like, yeah, like you're allowed to put up videos on X, we don't care. And sure, those videos might be of people being killed or attacked. They might be incendiary, they might be motivating violence, but actually, information should be free. Again, what side you're on can really impact the way you feel about the ethical or the legal consequences of this. So, um, again, I I don't. I was going to say I don't have all the answers, but I have a button that says all the answers. So there you go. Um, and again, thinking about this public apology is also about thinking about, well, what is it you're apologising for? Because if the purpose of this data, if the purpose of this app is to share that information, then it's just being used for that purpose. And thinking about that. Reviewing and potentially revising company policies, taking next procedures, speak to Pfizer, research tracker, absolutely. There's actually possibly a business opportunity for research tracker here. If it can be used in this way, maybe it shouldn't be public facing, maybe it should be an internal facing. Maybe they should be changing their apps to something that's a bit more like a Yammer. Maybe there's an opportunity here. But maybe they're just true believers and they're thinking it would be better if everybody knew about this. If this drug that essentially eliminates cancer from the world was freely available, like the polio vaccine. So a decision that was made in the development of the polio vaccine was to not seek a patent, which made it cheap and easy to replicate. Meant the costs of the research were borne by the people who did the research. But essentially, polio was pretty much eliminated as a consequence of not putting intellectual property rights on that drug. So maybe Research Tracker is a true believer of some sort. It's there to achieve. Again, we need more information to understand. Okay, some good stuff there. I will share all of those answers. I don't want to do this one because I think we will run out of time. And I don't want to run out of time. We need to finish on time. Okay, this scenario. Is it a stupid scenario? Is this something that you cannot imagine happening? No, you can't imagine it happening, or yes, you can imagine it happening. Where can you see something like this happening? Is there a product or a service that you use or you have used that does something like this? Nobody's admitting. Sorry? Instagram, possibly? I have based it on a real world situation. Has anybody ever used this app, Strava? I'm a big fan myself. Anybody who uses it, or if you haven't used it, it's enormously popular globally. Essentially, it takes data from people's smart devices, watches, heart rate monitors, etc., their phones, GPS. You can join up to Strava. You can do it free, or you can, unlock extra features by giving them some money. And it basically records your exercise, running, walking, swimming, yoga, Pilates, whatever it is that you do. And you can have little competitions with people. And it kind of, for those of us who get motivated by data, it's actually quite fun. I've been using it for about 10 years. I was a late arriver to sport, but parkrun, it's a gateway drug. So I've become a runner in my old age and I really enjoy it. I love the community and I like doing, I like hanging out with running folks and doing running stuff. So I'm on Strava. Many people are on Strava. I'm going to say, I should have written this down. I think it was 2018. It was definitely when I was Strava released this thing, the heat map. So basically you could go into your Strava account and you could have a look and see where people in your neighborhood run. And, it works like it's visually appealing, right? You can see that the white lines, like it's white hot, that's where people run the most. You can see from the slide where this particular heat map came from. Within hours of this feature being released, a young man, I think in the UK, I remember he was 19 years old, somebody can Google it, it's like it was a big case at the time, basically plotted this map on Google Earth. All these people are running in a place called Helmand in Afghanistan. Interesting. So what do you think this tells us? What do you reckon's happening in Helmand, Afghanistan, that would mean that like a whole lot of people have taken up jogging? Who do you reckon would be living in Helmand, Afghanistan, that would be using this app? Well, what do you think we can learn from it? It's a US military base, a secret US military base. It is a crime in the US to tell people where military bases are. So who lives at military bases? Well, on the whole, young men and women who it's their job to stay fit. They are allocated by their bosses, like smartwatches and heart rate devices. They are actively encouraged to go out for a run. Where do you run if you're at a military base? You run around the perimeter of the military base. So this has come straight from, now some of the real ones are hidden now. They came to some sort of solution. But has Strava committed an offence? Like, has Strava leaked state secrets? Clearly not. I mean, it couldn't have known that that was what was going to happen. Who should be liable for this is probably the commanders who, but at the time that commanders said to their soldiers, go out and compete, stay fit, we don't want you bored, because when you're not running in Afghanistan, you're doing drugs, basically. So they want them running, they want them out there being fit, competing with each other and stuff like that. But at the time that they asked them to do that, or encourage that, the heat map feature didn't exist. They hadn't seen that in the future. But it only took hours. It literally only took hours from this feature being released to it being all over the world where these military bases were. I think they identified 7 or 8 of them from memory. Cautionary tale, and that didn't actually require artificial intelligence. It just required, actually, let's see where people go jogging in Afghanistan at that particular time. Imagine what you can see using this right now of what's happening in bits of the Donbass region or in Gaza. That's actually a little bit frightening when you think about it. Okay, so the very last thing I have to do, other than to say thank you and goodbye, is answer this question and any others that come up on the question Q&A. So, do you research existing AI solutions or are you meant to innovate a new solution? You can do either. If you've got an existing solution, ideally you're applying it in a way, or you're looking at how it will apply and grow over time. I am quite happy for you to get your creative juices flowing and make up a technology like I did for today. I just want you to imagine it being used in a real company. So for those of you who don't feel like that makes sense to you, think about it from the point of view, your company, you've identified a thing that they do or that they want to do in that industry that's done a lot, where they want to do it more efficiently or effectively and explore the ways that they could use AI or big data to automate that, either a decision-making process or a recording process or whatever it is. You've got a lot of information about the kinds of things AI can do. Part of what we're doing is we're looking into the future. Think about the way that the law could change too, and the environment could change. So anything that you're delivering now could have new features and benefits going forward. Hopefully that answers the question. I think that question is already in the FAQs as a version of it. Any other questions, concerns, frustrations? Anybody else going to be setting their Strava account to private? It is a little bit creepy when you think about it, what people can find out about you with social media. Thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to seeing you next week. As always, just shoot me questions if you have them. Thank you. Cheers. Just give me a second to shut down and save, because if I don't, I don't have a record.